Awareness, the final frontier. These are the explorations of Jonathan Robinson and Brian Tom O'Connor. Their continuing mission, to discover fresh new paths to the mystery within, to seek out new joys and new methods of awakening, to boldly go into the heart of expanded consciousness. This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, friends, to Awareness Explorers. We're excited to have you. I'm thrilled to have a guest explorer today that I've been diving into her work the last couple of years. It's Dr. Judith Blackstone, the founder of the Realization Process. But before we introduce Judith, I want to say hello to Brian, and how you doing?
I'm doing very well, Jonathan. We're having our very first snowstorm of I wouldn't call it a storm. It's just a little flurry of the year here in New York City.
And we've both been cramming, reading all of Judith's books that we possibly can. And that's been fun. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest explorer. Judith Blackstone, PhD, is an innovative spiritual teacher and psychotherapist. She developed the Realization Process, which is an embodied approach to non-dual spiritual realization. She's the author of several books, including The Enlightenment Process, and I believe her most recent book, Trauma and the Unbound Body.
Yes.
Well, welcome to Awareness Explorers, Judith. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
As I said, I'm particularly knowledgeable about your work. I think I've read 5 of your 6 books. And I've taken many of your classes, so I actually know what I'm talking about this time, hopefully.
Let's hope that I do.
Yeah, right. So for people who don't know anything about the realization process, how do you describe what you came up with in your set of practices?
The realization process is basically a series of practices for uncovering in ourselves a very subtle, undivided experience of consciousness. I call it an experience. It's experienced as a dimension of ourselves. We experience it pervading our body and our environment at the same time, and that's why I put it in the category of non-dual, of oneness. Pervading our body, its experience is the ground of our individual being. So it does contribute very much to our personal healing, our psychological healing, our relational healing. And pervading our environment gives us an actual experience of oneness of our own being with everything around us.
You know, one of the things, we interview a lot of teachers, and we've all read books and non-dual and Advaita and all those things. What I really appreciate about your work, besides the fact that it's very embodied, is that you have a lot of innovative methods and ideas that have helped me to experience what you call fundamental consciousness. And that term you define a little bit differently than just pure awareness. Can you describe how it's different?
Yeah, these are just words, obviously, but I use the word consciousness in order to distinguish it from the kind of awareness that people talk about when they make this sort of gesture on their head. Awareness. Fundamental consciousness is something that we open to with our whole being, right? We could call it awareness, but I call it fundamental consciousness because we open to it through our heart. So it has a kind of even a detectable, very subtle quality of emotional ground there, of love. And even the detectable, we open to it through the bottom of our body, physical sensation, not only as an aspect of our individual oneness, but an aspect of our oneness with everything else. So it's a very rich space. It can be experienced as simply clear through transparency, and it can also be experienced as that kind of rich blend of this ground of our being.
Well, I just finished reading The Enlightenment Process, and I was fascinated by it, and fascinated to see that something that I've been thinking about now for the few years is covered very well in your book, which is it's sort of like the major missing piece in a lot of non-dual spirituality, which is the body. And for someone like me whose first encounter with this area would say be Nisargadatta Maharaj, for example, or Ramana Maharshi. And I remember someone writing that their first realization when they were studying with Nisargadatta was, I am not the body. And of course, also my Catholic background, the body was something that was almost regarded as sinful. And so I think that your take on including the body and not transcending it or being away from it or saying, I am not the body, is absolutely fascinating and effective. So what are your thoughts about including the body in spiritual realization?
I mean, it has a lot of different meanings, embodiment. One meaning very important is that we can carry our realization into our daily lives, that, everything we do is affected by our non-dual realization, our sense of oneness with everything. In the realization process, embodiment means that we actually experience our body as made of fundamental consciousness. So in a way, it's not a negation of the Nati Advaita Vedanta, I am not my body, I am not my emotions, I am not my thoughts. And they keep going and keep going and keep going. They get to what am I? And, Ramana Maharshi's work, I think he does come very close to going, I am fundamental consciousness. It doesn't mean that we don't have emotions, right? And that's really important. We have thoughts, we have emotions. We are just not that changing content. We're something deeper than that. And as the embodiment of fundamental consciousness, we actually experience that we're made of, flesh and bone and so forth. We're made of energy streaming, and we're also made of a stillness, an amazing luminous kind of stillness that feels like who we are, that I call fundamental consciousness.
And you take it even further when you talk about the vertical core of the body, which is, I think, a absolutely fascinating concept that a lot of us who have been in a sort of a not this, neti type of thing, don't consider. And so could you tell us a little bit about your concept of the vertical core of the body?
Well, the vertical core of the body is mentioned in Hindu yoga, certainly as Sushumna. The chakras are conceived of as being along it in the Hindu system. In Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, it's mentioned, it's called the central channel, obviously an English translation. And it arrives in both of those traditions because it is an entranceway into the ground of being, fundamental consciousness, that I call fundamental consciousness. That's called Rigpa in Tibetan Buddhism. That's called Brahman or self or pure consciousness in the Hindu system. It's an entranceway into that most subtle, undivided dimension of ourselves. So it's very important. Now, I was, taught years ago that you couldn't mention the core because that was Tantra, and Tantra was something different than non-duality, and, they should never touch. But of course, that's not true. When we make that deep inward contact with ourselves, we get to this very, very subtle core of ourselves that enables us to let go of our habitual grip, at least to some extent, on our own being and on the world around us, on our experience of the world around us. So it's a very important aspect of ourselves.
I studied Tantra and other disciplines, and I think of the central core. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term microcosmic orbit, which would be like from Qigong type of things. And I found it interesting that you mentioned that you just focus on the upward energy of that core. And I was wondering why that was the case. And I started to do it, and I found it very, very effective. That, I started to feel very high very quickly as I got in touch with that core and just felt like an upward surge of energy. But that seemed to be somewhat new to your particular brand.
Yeah, that question comes up a lot, and rightfully so. And I do it because it's effective. That's why I do it. I think, people say, well, can we open to a downward current? Yeah, we can. When we open to that upward current, which seems to be our most subtle energy, mixes with our breath, becomes prana, becomes our most subtle energy, then I think that all the other energies fall into place in a way. Our energy system does seem to be designed on a spectrum from dense to subtle, and there's so many different currents. And each of the major traditions talks about different types of currents. But this upward, very fine, like thread of energy that comes up through us vertically seems to be the most subtle and opens us to that most subtle energy. That's why I do it. A lot of the questions that come up in the realization process are only answered like that, because it works.
Well, that's the best answer. You don't get a better answer than that.
It's not a metaphysical system, which is disappointing to a lot of my students. They're like, finally, we're going to know how the universe works, how it all works. No, I have no idea how it all works, but I have learned over the years how to open to fundamental consciousness. And so that's all I'm teaching.
Another distinction that I found really, really helpful was like let's say you might say, inhabit your foot. And the word inhabit is very different than become aware of your foot or focus on your foot. And I'm wondering how you might help someone to experience inhabiting their hands or their foot versus having a sense from their head that they are trying to focus on the sensations there.
When I'm working with people who are new to the work, I often start with that, with just simply, rest your hands in your lap, become aware of your hands. You may notice by becoming aware of your hands how cold or hot they are, how tense. And you may also notice that you're being aware from the top down. And now enter into your hands. Let yourself experience that you're actually living within your hands, that you're present within your hands, that the hands are conscious of themselves from inside, all of that kind of language. And it's a real difference. So there's no way I can actually, if I'm in person, I've been taught in person now for almost, for a long time. If I'm in person, I'm almost forgetting what I used to do in person. But in person, I would put a hand on either side of an ankle, for example, and say, feel that you're between my hands. And I'm not sending them energy or anything. I'm just giving them walls, to enter into between. And now I find sometimes I can do that. They can do that themselves. Put a hand on either side of their own ankles, feel that you're between your own ankles. And that can be helpful. But many people can simply feel the difference, can notice that they're aware of their hands and then enter into their hands. So that's something very different. And because inhabiting the body puts us in touch right away with this unitive consciousness, this undivided consciousness, even just entering into the hands tends to enter us into our whole body.
Yeah, and I find it actually is an interesting process of surrender, because you kind of have to surrender your mental faculties to really enter into the physicality of being in your hands or your feet or whatever.
I shy away from that kind of formalization because I don't want people to stop thinking or to feel like this is some sort of headless state. The head is part of the body and part of our being, a very important part of our being. So, I don't want people sort of experience themselves from the neck down or not thinking, which has to be a suppression, right? It's true that our thoughts, our habitual tape loops thin out, but then we get better thoughts, newer thoughts that swim through the stillness. So it's not an unthinking state at all, although it might, in that very original, that first moment, require that, right? Require that, oh, okay, I'm not going to analyze this, I'm just going to do it, kind of thing. Right. I don't really think of it as the physical body because it's the body of fundamental consciousness, right? So, and that body of fundamental consciousness is everywhere. in us.
So when we experience within us the body of fundamental consciousness, we're not necessarily, we're experiencing like everyone's body, the universe's body. Is that how?
That may be.
But I know that. Okay, we're getting into metaphysics here. And you're right. I am more interested in the experience of it.
Yeah. What's most important is we're experiencing our own being. And that's a wonderful thing, and surprisingly, maybe a new thing for most of us on the planet, our own being. It does help us feel one with other beings. It does seem to be one ground. And when we're with another person, we experience that one undivided consciousness pervading us both at the same time as we experience it pervading our own body. That's a wonderful thing for some of us sensitive types who tend to give ourselves over in relationships, that we can actually still be embodied as our own being, knowing ourselves, because this fundamental consciousness reveals everything it pervades. So knowing our own needs and desires and preferences and responses at the same time that we actually experience oneness actual oneness with another person.
Well, that's one of the wonderful ways that you have of describing things, in that you're not negating anything. You're not negating the mind. Thoughts are part of our experience. You're not negating the body. You're not saying the ego has to disappear, which is a famous idea that a lot of spiritual seekers have. Oh, the ego has to disappear. But in it sounds like instead what happens is we somehow become more fully our authentic self.
That's right. And that's what's so interesting about it, because we uncover it. It's, in our postmodern world, we can't even really say that, everything is, something we're constructing. But this doesn't feel like that at any rate. It feels very much like we've uncovered it, like we've hit the bedrock. And it emerges to us as with the impact of authenticity. It feels like, oh, yeah, finally I'm real. All those social, masks and so forth even feels, and, here we go into, naive realism and all of that, but it even feels like we're finally seeing things at least more like they actually are, with less projection, less distortion.
And less filtering, right? You talk about that. Yeah.
That's right. Less filter. That's right. The filters fall away. And yes, we feel like, oh, this is who I am. Yeah.
Which is one of the things I like about it, is that you're not negating anything. One question I have is, since a lot of the system involves, quote, inhabiting the body, how do you distinguish, say, just, you feel something versus, in a way, it seems like there's a deeper level, which more is of vibration or energy. And how do you help people to get to these subtler levels?
Well, that's what the whole thing is about. All of the practices go towards that, going even to a deeper level than vibration and energy, to this stillness. Although, when we get to that stillness, we do get to the most subtle level of our energy level. So there's this kind of radiance that coexists with the stillness. But of course, our energy also moves through that stillness. But, one exercise I do pretty much near the beginning, when people first come to the work, is take a moment to experience yourself as physical matter. Mm-hmm. And if you're in a room with other human beings, you'll feel everybody separate into separate little clumps of physical matter. It's so interesting. And of course, that's the way maybe we can say, I don't know, 80% of people experience themselves, as a separate clump of physical matter, moving around with other clumps. Then experience yourself as energy. Take a moment to experience yourself as streaming, vibrating, pulsing energy. And many sensitive people, myself included, grow up, experience themselves as energy. And the thing about energy is we mushed together with everything around us as energy, And then, so the third step is now experience yourself as the stillness of fundamental consciousness. It's another level of attunement, a more subtle level of attunement. And they don't erase each other. Obviously, you're still going to be physical matter, you still bang against things, You still feel energy moving even more fluidly, even more deeply, because fundamental consciousness is a dimension of disentanglement, of non-obstruction, right? So when we know ourselves as that, then our energy moves through us more fluidly, our emotions move more deeply, our thoughts move more fluidly, creativity, so forth. So it doesn't stop the energy at all, but it gets underneath it in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that stillness, seems like when we touch it, we start to take on some of the, I guess, for lack of a better word, the qualities of it, or the fact that stillness includes what we experience, but isn't touched or changed or affected by what we experience. That's right.
It means that our tolerance for life actually increases. That we don't have to limit the impact of life, either pleasurable or painful, because we can experience it move through us and keep changing, and while we remain this basic fundamental stillness,
which is a beautiful experience to have. One of my tendencies is I always ask people, what can people do in 5 or 10 seconds, say while they're walking to the car, they're doing their dishes, they're doing email, which is where, a large part of our life is. The realization process has amazing guided meditations that you offer in your books. But I'm wondering if you can speak to how a person can take what they might experience in these guided meditations into talking on the phone or whatever it is.
Yeah, well, two things, in response to that. And one is that with consistent practice, and I don't mean for 10 years in the cave, but just for a little while, you stabilize there. And that's actually the technical Buddhist term for it. You stabilize in non-duality. Then whether you're talking on the phone or whatever you're doing, you experience that you're in your core. In fact, we live in this core of ourselves when we know ourselves as the pervasive space of fundamental consciousness. So you're always somehow centered and at your deepest perspective and at your deepest connection at the same time with everything around you. So that stabilizes. It becomes unchanging. You're just there. However, in the process or under duress, there's a lot of things you can do once you know the techniques. You can find your heart center and do the core breath there. I'll do that at the end of our interview today, So you can anchor there. You can anchor in the center of your head or your pelvic center and do the core breath there so that you put yourself in the center. So if you're feeling bombarded or agitated, you can put yourself there. You can feel that you're in your feet and ground there. And we have a whole foundational grounding practices that we do in the realization process. So there's a number of things that you can touch into briefly when you need to.
Can I add my experience with that?
Yes.
Because after reading the Enlightenment Process, I found your exercises amazingly effective, even just reading them, much less doing them with your eyes closed. And one of my favorite ones was the one where we contact the 3 centers in our head, in our heart, in our pelvic area, and breathe from there. And then sort of, I'm not sure exactly how you put it, but become aware of all 3 at the same time.
Yes.
And after I tried that, I discovered that I could then, at the drop of a hat, walking around, remember that, do it, and feel it within seconds.
Yes. Well, you've probably done a bunch of other practice for a while.
Well, that's true. That's true. Full disclosure, but that one I hadn't. I loved it.
I'll do that for at the end today. So that's something that you can always tune into in a moment of need of that.
Mm-hmm. Now, in some of your books, you talk about attuning to qualities. Qualities might be bliss or stillness, various qualities. And can you, and what the funny thing is, as I'm reading your books, and you'll say something like, well, attune to bliss. And then I'll find I'm feeling bliss all of a sudden,
And you're also very easy.
True. But, I haven't always been that way. And sometimes, I might have a lot of thoughts going on and it's not so easy. So how can you tell people what is attuning, or how might they get better at attuning to various qualities?
Just practice. I mean, it's just practice. There's two different attunement to qualities practice in the realization process. One is attuning to the ground of awareness, emotion, and physical sensation as aspects of fundamental consciousness, and all three at once. Actually, I'm saying there's two. Anyway, there's that one, and that's to help people open with their whole being to fundamental consciousness. So they're not just opening through their head or through their heart if they're emotionally based people, but through their whole being. So there's that one. In the main practice that we do, inhabiting the body, we do that practice of inhabiting the body so that we can let go from within the whole body into the ground of fundamental consciousness. But in that practice, we also tune to qualities within the body that specifically seem to be there. I give words to them, which are just my own words for them. But when we inhabit ourselves, there do seem to be qualities there: power in our midsection, love in our chest. The internal, our being seems to possess qualities. So we attune to them, and just as I said before, in attuning to them, they bloom, they blossom, and then they become stable. So we're always there. Right. Mm-hmm. So we always can feel our power, right? We may tune it up in a situation where we feel a little threatened or something, but it's always there. It's always supporting us, right? With experience of our sexuality, experience of our love, experience of the quality of our voice. I tune to those qualities because it is those qualities that we tend to shut down in reaction to overwhelming experience as children. We're disempowered, when we have loss that we don't get to mourn the voice, or when we have to keep down our voice, or clamp down on our tears, or keep out food when we're not hungry and we're being fed. All of that tends to clamp down on our throat. So attuning to these qualities helps us open more fully, but then they stabilize because they really are there, right? So it's just a matter of doing the practices again and again until you just feel them all the time.
Well, you brought the subject of closing down with traumatic events of childhood or adult life. And your latest book, Trauma and the Unbound Body, talks a lot about how to deal with those traumas. And I'm wondering what you can say about that, specifically how people can release stuck physical and emotional traumas.
A big subject, of course.
Yeah, you have 20 seconds. No, I'm kidding.
Just by inhabiting the body and attuning to those qualities and making inward contact with ourselves to some extent, we recover ourselves from trauma. The realization process differs from a lot of other, maybe most other body psychotherapy approaches to healing trauma, the trauma field, in fact, which usually focuses on the nervous system. And I'm focusing instead on the fascia, on this level of kind of tissue that's everywhere in the body, which means that we can organize ourselves in reaction to events in our lives all the way through our body, anywhere in our body, way, way deep in our chest, where, just this tiny little closing down, shutting down of the heart, or shutting down of our vision or our hearing through that tissue that's everywhere in our body, which is very susceptible, very sensitive to the mind, the fascia. So I'm using the word trauma extremely loosely as anything that's overwhelming for the child, anything that we can't fully experience. So it can be as simple as a face we love suddenly looking angry or sad, right? Anything that, a loud sound, an abrasive picture, a picture that our parents put up in all good faith, which, has some kind of caterpillar, from Alice in Wonderland emerging. Anything like that we've had to sort of, limit ourselves in order to keep ourselves intact. It's a wonderful natural ability we have to keep ourselves intact by limiting the impact of abrasive events. And most of us can live very normal lives without ever releasing that. Of course, more severe trauma, we can actually shut down ability to love, ability to feel sexual pleasure, that really needs to be released. But even if the trauma has been not very much, when we begin to open by inhabiting our body, suddenly the world is much more vivid. Our emotions, I didn't realize I could just well up with love whenever I see another human being. So it's a kind of freedom. Now, some of those holding patterns in the fascia will not release just by inhabiting the body or doing the core breath. And for that, we have a special technique in the realization process called the release technique, which I never teach in a situation like this where I can't see the people. But it is using the very subtle focus that we can get by being in the subtle vertical core of ourselves and focusing within the tensions. And so there's all that whole aspect. I think it's coming into the spiritual world altogether, the spiritual field, contemporary spiritual field, that psychological healing and spiritual realization are really become the same process as we move along, right? As we progress, that you really can't separate them anymore, right?
God knows we've tried.
We did. We tried. Yeah, and a lot of emergencies and all kinds of things. But now I think it's coming more, and a lot of, several of the non-dual teachers are, like myself, psychotherapists. We've spent decades sitting with people in pain, and we know how that's related to the opening to fundamental consciousness. So it's a very important part of opening, whether you focus on the, however you approach it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after all, why do people come to spirituality in the first place? Usually some pain or some part of their experience that they don't want to be experiencing. And yet the surprising result is that they open to the experience they thought that they didn't want to be experiencing. Yes. And they are not defended. And you use the word like binding. It becomes less bound within them.
That's right. We become unbound, and the safety is our contact with ourselves that comes to replace that binding.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And along with that contact with ourselves, naturally comes loyalty to ourselves. Right? This hurts, I'm going to leave. Right? Self-possession, self-acceptance, self-love as actual experiences. So there's the safety, there's the self-care and the safety. And also being in that core, our perspective actually deepens, right? So life is not just directly impinging on ourselves as so many sensitive people experience,
You've been at this a long time, and I'm wondering if, in an overview way, do you think we're waking up, or what do you see as the trends?
I don't know. I live in America, and that becomes a very hard thing to up and down.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope we're going in a good direction. I hope so. I have no idea. If you look at the very, 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 very long picture, yes, we're evolving.
Well, something I notice is, I teach workshops on this type of stuff sometimes, and it seems like 25 years ago, it would take a while to get people to experience awareness or fundamental consciousness. And now, it might take 3 minutes.
Yeah. I think that may be. I think the wonderful spreading of mindfulness techniques into the popular culture. That's a wonderful thing. That there have been people. I feel like my work builds on that or counters it in some ways, but still, it has made the world aware that maybe they're not as mindful as they could be, right? Mm-hmm. And then even this trauma trend, where trauma has just become like a buzzword. Oh, trauma. People who are taking that out into the world in a big way and having huge platforms about it. That's a wonderful thing. And people are like, oh, maybe I'm traumatized. Yeah. And maybe I shouldn't be treating my son the way my father treated me. That of course is wonderful. So yes, so there must be a general waking up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how do you differentiate? Mindfulness is a buzzword as well, in which they say, be aware of your body as you're doing stuff. Do you have any way of explaining that realization process is kind of a deeper level, or how do you differentiate it?
I do explain that, I say it right out, but, we're not being aware. We're getting to the ground that is aware everywhere. I think some Vipassana techniques do get to the ground. So, not to just brush them all aside. But yeah, we're getting to a level of unity of consciousness that in general isn't spelled out in mindfulness techniques. Mm-hmm. But much better to be mindful than not.
It's all in the right direction.
Yeah, no comparison, really.
One of my favorite topics, which you talk about a lot in the Enlightenment Process, is the false self. And a lot of times it's hard to get a handle on what that is and how it was created. I mean, you had a description of it where you talk about constrictions in that create gaps in our ability to experience life, and that those gaps are filled in with false images. And I found that pretty illuminating and good, but I was wondering if you could talk a little more about the false self, what it is, how it's created, how it's seen through.
How it what?
How it is seen through, how we see through.
Oh, how we see through. Well, as we inhabit the body and release those holding patterns, the fascia, just as I was talking about, we, some of those compensatory patterns naturally fall away. Sometimes people come because those to the work or to any of our work because those compensatory patterns are no longer working well. One example, of course, is power. So person feels disempowered, but they, disempowered from maybe age 2, where they've been ridiculed and overpowered and maybe worse, maybe beaten. And so they, have no sense of power at all. They're just a nothing. And then they go to school and they're surrounded by peers. And they have they can just become more and more disempowered, or they can create a powerful image that keeps people away, that, that counters that. So, so then, the power comes into the forehead. If we're brainy kind of people, we can use that, right? And it doesn't really work because we can still feel like we've been punched in the belly, right? So after a while, it doesn't work. So that's false self, and it's usually visible as a holding pattern, as compensatory holding patterns. Narcissistic holding, inflation patterns, which become obvious that they're compensating for. And once we let go of those patterns that we feel, oh, terrible, actually I feel inferior to everybody. In fact, I always have felt, people will say, oh, always have felt inferior. In fact, and then they can feel that as the holding, as that holding pattern. We have layers and layers. So, so many examples, the face of social, please accept me, or social politeness, or when that falls away, and then we can feel our actual face. It's a wonderful thing, and we might not be so accommodating anymore. And then we have to deal with that. How do I bridge to people without that social false patterning?
Right. It sounds like the false patterning is like, or the false self is like masks that we wear to interact with the world, to protect the defended emotion, and that beneath the mask is the real self.
That's right. Sometimes beneath the mask is the holding pattern based on the trauma.
There could be many layers down.
That's
before
right.
you
and
get
then
to
beneath
the
that
center.
is
Right,
the
sure.
real self. Yeah,
Right.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to make sure we have plenty of time for your guided meditation, because I found them to be so helpful. And in a moment, I'm going to ask for anything we may have missed, but I do want to just acknowledge our Patreon supporters. You make this possible. And if you're interested in supporting us and getting a lot of extra goodies from us, extra interviews, guided meditations, and such, go to patreon.com/awareness explorers. And thanks for all the support and the emails. And Brian and I really appreciate it. But Judith, I want to make sure that there was no gaping holes in anything we missed, or anything in terms of something you'd like to add before we do a guided meditation.
No, that seems quite complete to me. Yeah.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah, the qualities, the core, the space.
And how can people learn about your work? You have a website, or what?
Yeah, the website's best, realizationprocess.org.
Uh-huh.
And that has everything.
Great. Do you have any final words, Brian, before we go into a guided meditation?
Just to say thank you, Judith, for sharing this with us. I'm really looking forward to our listeners hearing about it. And I just want to let them know that my firsthand experience, just simply reading the book and not having training as Jonathan did in person, really had a deep effect. So please look into the realization process in Judith's books.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had some like hoodoo voodoo in there, because you would say something like tune to fundamental consciousness, and there I'd be, and then and feel your bliss.
No, that's on you.
That's on you.
Jonathan.
Okay, I'll take credit for that one then. Anyways, I hear you have a guided meditation, and we are happy to hear that.
Sure. I'll do the core breath, as that came up a number of times in our talk just now. There are two main practices in the realization process. One is the inhabiting the body and letting go, tuning directly to the pervasive space of fundamental consciousness. That one takes about half an hour. The core breath is much shorter. So I'm going to do that one, all right? So if you feel like doing this, come and sit up. Good to do this sitting upright if you can. You can do this eyes open or closed, doesn't matter. Start by just focusing on your breathing. Just breathing. An even breath to start with. Silently counting 3 counts to inhale, 3 counts to exhale, or whatever number is comfortable for you. Smooth, calm breath. Now come down to your feet and feel that you're inside your feet, that you're actually living within your feet, actually present there. And let your breath adjust to being that far down in your body so that your inhale doesn't lift you up away from there. And now take a moment to feel that you're living inside your whole body all at once. Right? Contact everywhere within your body all at once. We start this core breath by finding the center of your head. And this point is deep within the internal space of your head. So it's not the forehead and it's not the top of the head. It's deep within the internal sphere of your head, somewhere between your ears. Just by being in the center of your head, it enters you into your wholeness. See if you can feel that. It gives you access everywhere in your body at once, right? Without leaving the center of your head. And now bring your breath into the center of your head and back out again. The breath comes in through both nostrils, makes a single stream of air that can go right through to the center of your head. And the exhale is a release. It goes wherever it goes. And now initiate the breath within the center of your head. So instead of bringing the breath to the center of the head, we're now starting the breath in the center of your head, as if you had air there that you could breathe. Just by breathing within the center of your head, you may feel a resonance down through your whole core. That's all the way down to the center of the bottom of your torso. But just by breathing in the center of your head. Now find your heart center, and this point is in the center of your chest, but deep in the core of your body. So as deeply inward as you can focus within your chest without strain. Also known as the heart chakra. You can leave go your awareness of the center of the head, and you're just in the heart center. And now initiate the breath from within your heart center. So the breath starts there. It's like as if you had a little tiny nose right in the core of your chest. And you could breathe there. And just by breathing within your heart center, you may feel a resonance through your whole core that's going to be now up to your head and down to the base of your torso at the same time. Very gentle vibration within your whole core, just by breathing in your heart center. Take a moment to experience your whole internal space, the internal space of your whole body, just by being in your heart center. Just by being there, it gives you access everywhere in your body at once. Now find your pelvic center And this point is in the center of your pelvis, but deep in the core of your body. So as deeply inward as you can focus within your pelvis without strain. And just by being in your pelvic center, just by being there, it enters you into your wholeness, gives you access everywhere in your body at once. Initiate the breath within your pelvic center. Right? Start the breath there, even before you feel it move in your nose or your lungs. See if you can feel it move within the pelvic center. And just by breathing within your pelvic center, you may be able to feel a resonance, a very gentle vibration throughout your whole core. Now we're going to do all 3 points. Find the center of your head again. Find the center of your head and your heart center at the same time. Now, if you can, and this can take some practice, add in the pelvic center as well. If you can't find all 3 points today, that's fine. Just do 2. But if you can, find the center of your head, your heart center, and your pelvic center. And just by being in those 3 points, it enters you into your wholeness, gives you access everywhere in your body at once. Very gently initiate the breath within all 3 points. Again, just do 2 if that's what you can do today, it's fine. These are practices, so as you practice, it becomes much easier. If you can, initiating the breath from within all 3 points. And it's a very subtle breath, very thin, like a thread of breath within all 3 points. Just by breathing within all 3 points, you may be able to feel a very gentle vibration throughout the whole internal space of your body. See if you can, vibration in your arms, vibration in your legs, everywhere. Now, if your eyes are closed, open them. Find these 3 points with your eyes open, or 2 if that's what you're doing. Center of your head, heart center, and if you can, the pelvic center as well. Eyes are open. Even with your eyes open, just being in those 3 points gives you access everywhere in your body at once. Take a moment to experience your environment from this core of yourself. Right? Usually we experience the world from the surface of ourselves. So you may find this deepens your perspective a little bit. And now initiate your breath from within all 3 points if you can, or 2. Feeling very gentle vibration everywhere in your body at once. Right? We'll sit like that for just a minute, 1 minute. Gentle, subtle, thin breath within all 3 points. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. It was marvelous. Yes, I really love that one. Thank you for doing that, sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Felt like I did a half-hour Qigong workout without having to actually move my butt from my seat, which is my preferred way.
That's what we're going for.
Right.
Well, it's been really wonderful to connect with you, Judith, and thanks for a lot of years of putting this great stuff out there and great methods, and I know our listeners will benefit from that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's been lovely.
Thank you for being here.
And our friends and listeners out there, please tell your friends and family about our free meditations. We have like 80 or 90 of them now at awarenessexplorers.com, and all the great episodes. As Brian likes to say, knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give to friends and family, or something like that, right?
That's pretty much it. I think you hit it on the nose there, Jonathan.
Well, it makes a unique holiday gift. We could all use a little bit more peace during this crazy time.
Gives them space to be themselves.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Oh, that is a gift, and it's free.
Yes. So friends, till next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.